Hello, welcome to another episode of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm Andy Cleff, and I'm working out solo today to share an idea around team communication and group dynamics. Yeah, I get the irony. At the root of this idea is David Kantor's four-player model, and using it to cultivate a continuous improvement mindset in a high-performing team. We'll unpack what the four-player styles are, how they can help or hinder collaboration, and then go through an interactive exercise you can run with your own team. If you make it all the way through to the end of the podcast, congrats. You'll have a new lens for understanding team dynamics, as well as a strategy for helping team members stretch their communication muscles. So let's dive in. Let's start with a working definition of high-performing team. Let's break it into two parts. Team, simply a group of people who work together to achieve a common goal. For me, it applies to every single level in an organization. If you're a fan of flight levels, levels 1, 2, and 3, if you've been reading Wiring the Winning Org, layers 1, 2, and 3, they correspond in numbering. Layer 1, level 1, is the development team, the squads. If you're aligned by topologies, they could be stream-aligned, complicated subsystems, etc. How big are they? I don't want to get into that argument today. More than one, less than 20? I don't know. Manageable size, maybe 5 to 15. Layer 2, system layer, is a coordination layer where representatives from teams form a team of teams. Sometimes this is a scrum of scrums, or a PO sync, or an art sync, or the systems team. And then finally, layer 3 is where the strategy is built with guiding mechanisms. It's the social circuitry. It is portfolio, organization, and executive leadership. Each of these layers has a team construct. Let me talk a little bit about high performing. Signals I'd expect to see is that folks are working well together, collaborating effectively, leveraging diverse strengths. They build trust, open communication, shared accountability, and alignment around a common, clear, and compelling goal. Collectively, they have a commitment to deliberate learning, adapting to change, which implies they have meaningful feedback loops, both qualitative and quantitative. They have a very diverse set of communication styles, and they're able to leverage those strengths, and collectively, they achieve remarkable outcomes. So critical to high performance is having that diverse set of communication styles, and that's where Kantor comes in. Being able to leverage those different strengths, that's what allows teams to consider multiple perspectives, surface critical insights, ultimately make better decisions together. And that's where the magic happens. And that's where they do amazing things. Let's explore this four-player model. It was developed by David Kantor as part of his structural dynamics work. He was explaining the nature of face-to-face communication in groups. I'll put a link in the show notes for more on Kantor and his body of work. It describes these four fundamental behavior patterns that tend to show up. These patterns or styles are mover, followers, opposers, and bystander. Each style has distinct tendencies in how they communicate and how they contribute to group discussions and group dynamics. It's important to know that no one role of Kantor's is better than another. In fact, all four styles are necessary for a team to operate with efficacy. Furthermore, folks may shift styles during the course of a single interaction. Let's walk through a brief overview of each of Kantor's four players, covering the strengths and the challenges. The mover style is about initiating, proposing new ideas, setting direction, driving forward. The bright side is bringing a sense of purpose, focus, and momentum. Without movers, there is no direction. But taken too far, mover mode can become overbearing, controlling, and dismissive of other people's input. Follower style is about implementation and harmony. The strength aspect is about carrying out actions, supporting ideas, and creating an encouraging environment. Without followers, there is no completion. But follower mode can easily slip into being overly passive, conflict avoidant, and differential to a fault. Opposer style channels critical thinking, challenges assumptions and points of potential blind spots. And these opposing viewpoints are vital for considering other perspectives. Without opposers, there is no correction. But opposer mode can cross into merely being cynical contrarians if one's not careful. And finally, there is the bystander role, being the analytical observer who can see things from a detached point of view. Without bystanders, there is no perspective. The downside is one in bystander mode can become so removed that they don't actually contribute or move things forward. That's a really short overview, very concise. If you want to dig deeper, I've assembled a more comprehensive view of the 4 player styles on my website. You can see the show notes, read about the recurring patterns of language and behavior, the bright and shadow sides. I've also provided on that blog post ideas about some of the limiting fears and motivations that are behind each of those styles. I mentioned earlier, all roles are necessary, and this is a key premise of Kantor's model, that high-performing teams need a balanced presence of all 4 styles. If any one style is missing or heavily dominates group dynamics, communication breaks down. And poor communication leads to misunderstandings, conflicts, delays, frustration. For example, opposers with no movers means a lack of direction. All followers with no bystanders risks groupthink. You get the idea. Being able to recognize the patterns, appreciating how the styles interact, and consciously distributing the roles leads to a much more comprehensive, nuanced discussion, and ultimately better outcomes. And it's also a way of evening out the airtime, tapping into everyone's complementary strengths. But you got to raise awareness. So that's where this retrospective exercise, I hope, comes in. You can use it to start applying or exploring the 4-player model with your own team. It's a facilitated exercise. Could be part of a regular retrospective. Y'all do retros at the team level, I'm sure. You haven't canceled them. The system level, probably doing them as well. How about at level 3, executive leadership? Think about how powerful it would be to have a cadence of facilitated retrospectives. Anyway, here's how it works. First, each person on the team needs to identify their default player style. It's a preference, the role they tend to gravitate towards instinctively. There used to be an online 4-player assessment tool, but it has gone dark and I haven't been able to find a replacement. So instead, just share brief definitions of each style and have people self-identify. If there's a high level of safety on the team, perhaps have folks identify each other's default styles. That would certainly be interesting. Next, come up with a group collaboration activity. Some of the classic options for in-person events includes the marshmallow challenge, the ballpoint game, or building something with Legos. If for remote, there are plenty of ideas out there. Virtual penny flip, build a pizza using Miro, any kind of short collaborative multiplayer game. So you've got default modes identified, you've got the game, you lay it out, and then when you kick off the exercise, the key thing is to have everyone silently choose one of the 4-player styles other than their default. So if you're naturally a mover, you take the opposer stance for this activity. Then run the group activity. The key point is everybody is operating using the behaviors, the language, and the mindset of this chosen alternate style. For movers trying to be bystanders, that means restraining their desire to leap into action. I feel so seen. For followers embodying opposers, They have to push themselves to be more vocal, critical, maybe contrarian. After the activity, debrief as a team. One of the things you could do is first have everyone guess what role each player adopted. And then talk. Was each style well represented, or were there some lacking? Were there balanced discussions with diverse perspectives as a result? Or were there conflicts, stagnation, groupthink, because certain styles weren't present? Have folks share what felt natural versus challenging, what blind spots they might have noticed. Unpacked how the 4-style interactions played out, what complemented each other, which ones created friction or tension. Prompts, if you have time, can go further. Run another round, pick new roles, set up situations where folks purposely overuse a particular style, like they might in real life. In any event, through a short exercise, 20-30 minutes, the team gets to viscerally experience the 4-player styles in a new way. And they have the opportunity, importantly, to build empathy for the other styles and to begin to develop self-awareness about their own default tendencies and biases. So, real world. Take it out of the retrospective exercise, which does build powerful awareness, but the goal here isn't just to have one insightful retro. You have to integrate these concepts in a sustainable way, and that requires ongoing practice, discipline, and commitment. Applying these learnings to the team's day-to-day interactions. Some ideas? Well, revisit the team's working agreements. Make it okay to point out instances when someone notices certain player styles taking over or being left out. Something as simple as, hey, it seems like we have a lot of opposers scrutinizing this idea right now. What do the bystanders think? Do we have any other perspectives we should be considering? Folks can also work on toggling between player styles themselves during discussions. Like if they notice a lack of mover-type drive, they can consciously, explicitly shift into that initiating role to try to re-energize the conversation. And frankly, some of the most valuable team conversations may be about intentionally rebalancing individuals' overly present default style. Giving clean feedback. That's a whole nother pod. But in any event, it's a constant calibration. And the key is developing both self-awareness as well as collective awareness to recognize which styles are showing up too much or too little in any given situation. And having the language, the trust, and the safety to talk about it. At both the individual and the group level, it means developing specific action plans to reinforce and build new habits over time. And it starts with that first letter of ADKAR, awareness. What are the triggers that cause you to automatically resort to your default player style? How can you pause and choose to embody a different style instead when it might be appropriate? And what existing behaviors are working that you want to keep and possibly amplify? Add a dash of knowledge and reinforcement. Make it okay to raise awareness of instances when someone is falling into the dark side of a style. And equally important is celebrating impactful moments like when an opposer perspective leads to a crucial new insight. The long-term goal is to shift your team's baseline dynamics, to get to a place where you naturally provide balanced air times to all player styles by distributing the roles fluidly in support of your current discussion needs. And that's the ultimate state of productive, synergistic communication. Hey, it's not an easy journey. It will require sustained effort over time, but the payoff is achieving a communication environment marked by healthy debate, critical thinking, making space for all voices, and ultimately smarter collaborative decisions. It's absolutely worth the investment. Well, that's a wrap on a flyby of the 4-player model and using it to help team members stretch their communication muscles. I'll quickly recap some of the key points from this episode. Teams need to cultivate a balanced perspective of movers, followers, opposers, and bystanders to enable comprehensive communication. Each of the 4 player styles have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's about channeling the positive aspects of each while being aware of the blind spots. Running a retrospective exercise and having your team members consciously try on a different style can be a powerful learning experience, helping to build empathy, self-awareness, as well as flexibility. But it can't be a one-and-done activity. Real improvement happens through sustained practice, reinforcement, and a commitment to communicate in a more intentional, mindful way. If you're ready to stretch your team's communication muscles, give this retro a shot. Have fun with it. Let me know how it goes. See the show notes for links to articles and full exercise details. That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and a rating or comment on your podcast platform of choice. If it's the first time you've heard us, subscribe. If you'd like to join the discussion, share your retro ideas, pop on over to our Discord server. Links are in the show notes. Finally, support from listeners just like you help us cover our hosting costs. See the show notes again for details on how you can become a patron. Till next time, Agile Uprising, signing out.